Have you ever considered this haunting possibility that not every monster perished in the flood? Some didn't drown, some didn't fall, some survived. But not in flesh, not as massive forms crashing through ancient forests. No, they survived in blood. Blood passed down through generations. Blood that carries more than genetics. Blood that whispers of rebellion, corruption, and a secret older than Babel. It's a theory that shook the quiet certainty of Professor Ethan Caleb's life, a scholar whose career had always danced along the fine line between archaeology and theology. And it began with a manuscript. The year was 2017, a late summer evening in the Judean desert. Ethan Caleb stood beneath the fading light outside a crumbling cave near Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls had first been uncovered. But what he found was not a scroll, not at first glance. It was a stone box sealed with tar and inscribed in Paleo-Hebrew. Inside, nestled between decayed fragments of linen, was something extraordinary. A parchment, faded but unmistakably old, written in ink that shimmered faintly when kissed by desert light. 3 words leapt off the brittle surface: giants after flood. The text that followed was fragmented, but it bore resemblance to known passages from the Book of Enoch, a text excluded from most modern Bibles yet revered by early Jewish communities. That night, by lantern light, Ethan began to translate. The Nephilim, watchers, divine judgment, a remnant preserved. Was it possible that what had been dismissed as apocrypha held clues the canon had veiled? As he worked, Ethan began to see a pattern, and more than that, a question. If the flood had destroyed everything as Genesis declared, why do giants appear after the flood? Genesis 6:4 makes a curious remark. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Also afterward. 2 words. 2 words that suggest something survived. Ethan would spend the next 5 years chasing that mystery across texts, ruins, and bloodlines. And what he uncovered wasn't just a historical anomaly. It was a revelation, one that suggests the true danger wasn't what the flood destroyed, but what it failed to cleanse. Because some things don't cling to wood or survive in caves. Some things live in silence, inherit, wait, and rise again. In the next segment, who were the Nephilim really? And why did their existence warrant a divine reset of the entire earth? Ethan Caleb's discovery sent ripples far beyond dusty library and cave ruins. The deeper he studied, the more unsettling the questions became. Because what he uncovered next was not just textual, it was genealogical. To trace the survival of the Nephilim, Ethan had to go back. Not to Genesis 6, but to Genesis 10. To the list of Noah's descendants. To the names scholars skim past. Their buried in lineage was a recurring emphasis that demanded attention. And Ham, the father of Canaan. Why, Ethan wondered, did Moses repeat that phrase not once, not twice, but over and over? Ham, the father of Canaan. Not Shem, the father of Aram. Not Japheth, the father of Javan. Only Ham was given this constant reminder. It was as if Scripture itself was whispering a warning. Because Canaan wasn't just a son, he was a carrier. And through him the old blood would rise again. The Book of Enoch gave Ethan the missing piece. It described in chilling clarity how the Watchers, a band of 200 fallen angels, descended in the time of Jared long before Noah. These angels taught humans secrets they weren't meant to know: weapon-making, enchantment, astrology, and vanity. And they didn't stop at knowledge. They took human wives. From these unions came the Nephilim, beings of immense size, violence, and spiritual contamination. The earth, Enoch says, cried out under their weight. God judged them. The flood came. But here's the question. Did every drop of their legacy perish? Enoch 10 suggests something horrifying. That while the physical bodies of the giants were destroyed, their spirits, their essence remained. Disembodied, wandering, infecting. Ethan followed this trail to Genesis 9. The floodwaters had receded. Noah's family began anew. But then came a disturbing incident, Noah's drunkenness, Ham's transgression, and a curse, but not upon Ham, upon Canaan. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be. Again the question returned, why curse the son, not the father? Unless the sin did not begin with Ham, unless it had already taken root in Canaan. Could it be that one of the wives on the ark, perhaps Ham's wife, carried the dormant blood of the Nephilim? Could that ancient corruption have hidden not in defiance, but in DNA? And if so, how many generations did it sleep? How long before it woke? Ethan's breath caught as he traced the names forward. Canaan, Sidon, Heth, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Anakim, giants, again, not in myth, in scripture. Not before the flood, but after. Before we can understand how they survived, we must first understand what they were. The Nephilim were not merely tall men nor warriors of legend. They were something other, something that heaven itself could not tolerate. Scripture calls them the mighty men of old, men of renown. But behind the awe is a terrible truth. The Nephilim were hybrids, the offspring of divine rebellion and human vulnerability. They were born when the sons of God, interpreted by many as fallen angels, descended and took daughters of men. Genesis 6:1-4 tells this with an eerie simplicity, like a record, trying not to tremble as it speaks. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. That one phrase, "and also afterward," will haunt every segment of this story, because it suggests continuity, survival, a thread that wasn't severed. The book of Enoch fills the silence that Genesis leaves. It names the angels. It describes the unions. It outlines the forbidden knowledge taught to mankind, sorcery, metallurgy, enchantments, and the moral ruin that followed. The Nephilim were giants, not only in height, but in hubris. They filled the earth with blood. Their appetite was not only for food, but for destruction. Mankind cried out. The earth itself groaned beneath their weight. And God wept. Then he judged. Enoch 7:5-6 describes it plainly. They devoured all which the labor of men produced until it became impossible to feed them. Then they turned themselves against men in order to devour them. The Nephilim were cannibals. More than that, they were spiritual desecration wrapped in flesh. So God sent the flood, a reset, a cleansing of cosmic proportions. But the story doesn't end there. Because if they were utterly destroyed, why do we find their kind again? Goliath, O of Bashan, the Anakim, the Imim, Rephaim. And so the ancient riddle echoes. If the flood wiped them out, who dared to recreate them? Or did something far more subtle endure? If the Nephilim were wiped away, why did their shadows stretch into the promised land? Because some legacies are not carried in bone, but in blood. Ethan Caleb's research turned toward an uncomfortable direction: the wives of Noah's sons. While Scripture names the men Shem, Ham, and Japheth, it never names their wives, never speaks of their bloodline, never clarifies their past. And that silence became a scream. What if one of these women carried within her the dormant seed of the fallen ones, not as a visible mutation, but as a hidden echo, a trait, a code? Genetic darkness passed through generations until conditions called it forth again. Could this explain why giants returned? The Book of Enoch describes the posthumous fate of the Nephilim. Their spirits would wander the earth as unclean forces, tormenting and tempting. But it says nothing of their flesh, nothing of their genetic inheritance. Genesis 10 may hold the key. The line of Ham, particularly through his son Canaan, becomes a recurring focus. Genesis 10:15-19 lays out a list of tribes descended from Canaan tribes that would later become Israel's fiercest enemies: the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Anakim. The Anakim were known for one thing: they were giants. When Israelite spies scouted Canaan, they returned terrified. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Numbers 13:33. The text is clear. These weren't just tall men. These were descendants of the Nephilim. So again, the question arises, how did they return? The answer may lie not in rebellion, but in genetics. It's possible that Ham's wife was not fully human, not in the way Scripture defines pure in his generations. That phrase used to describe Noah in Genesis 6:9 may imply more than just righteousness. It may speak to genetic purity. Noah was whole, but his sons' wives, we do not know. And that mystery opens the door. Because traits can hide. Recessive genes can sleep for generations. And when two carriers unite, the past awakens. Like Goliath, like his brothers, like the Anakim. In the land God promised to Israel, something ancient had risen again. Not from new sin, but from old seed. A remnant, a residue, a shadow of the flood, still walking in flesh. What Ethan found next changed everything. It wasn't in Genesis, not even in Enoch, but in a forgotten scroll preserved by a desert sect, the Book of Jubilees. While many scholars debate its authority, Ethan saw it as a bridge, a missing thread, a whisper from antiquity about what still lingers. The Book of Jubilees, sometimes called Little Genesis, recounts the same timeline as Genesis, but with striking additions. It tells us more about Noah's life after the flood, his warnings, his fears, and, most surprisingly, his prophecy. In Jubilees 10, after the floodwaters had receded, Noah prays fervently, "Lord, the spirits of the giants oppress my children. Bind them, so they may no longer corrupt or devour." God responds, but not as we might expect. Only 9/10 of the spirits are imprisoned. 1/10 is left to roam. Why? For testing, for judgment, for prophecy. This revelation shook Ethan. It reframed the entire post-flood era. Because if only part of the evil was bound, then part was allowed to linger, like a dormant virus, silent, spreading. And what's worse, Jubilees hints that this remnant would rise again, that in the final generations their influence would return not just in spirit but in flesh. Giants once more, but not as warriors, as rulers, hidden in plain sight. Ethan traced the prophecy further. Jubilees 23 describes the decline of human generations, the corruption of hearts, the shortening of lives, the rise of dark rulers. Their judges and rulers shall become devourers of their people. They shall act with injustice and oppress all. Was this poetic metaphor or genetic memory? What if the rulers described weren't merely corrupt, but descended from corruption? What if the Nephilim legacy hadn't just returned in ancient Canaan, but in modern kingdoms? And what if those carrying it didn't even know? In the next part, Ethan's research uncovers an unsettling genealogy, one that leads from Canaan to Goliath to someone living today. Ethan's search moved beyond texts, into blood, into names, into shadows cast by ancestry. He began tracing genealogies that documented the disputed and the forbidden. And what he found was a line, a thread that ran from Ham to Canaan, to Enoch, to Goliath, and then across centuries of diaspora and intermarriage into the folds of modern families. Some names were lost, others hidden, but the thread never snapped. Ethan was no conspiracy theorist. He used DNA studies, Y chromosome markers, genealogical texts, and while much of it was speculative, one thing became disturbingly clear. The bloodline of the giants may have continued through silence, through privilege, through power, because history has a pattern, and blood remembers. He found links to ancient Philistines in regions of southern Europe, names with Semitic origins embedded in aristocratic lineages. Even patterns of gigantism, literal and symbolic, traced through rulers known for empire conquest and unexplainable cruelty. But then Ethan found something personal, A DNA fragment from a Middle Eastern dig site, an ancient femur believed to belong to a Philistine warrior. It contained an anomaly, a genetic marker never before catalogued. And when compared to global databases, it matched. A living person, not distant royalty. A politician, anonymous in the research. Public on the screen. Ethan stared at the result and wept. Because the fight was no longer about past theories. It was now about present influence. What if Nephilim traits were never meant to manifest as size alone, but as spiritual distortion, ruthless ambition, inhuman detachment? What if the giant in our generation doesn't carry a sword, but a platform, a microphone, a policy? Ethan's research was no longer safe, and that's when the warnings began. What secrets could be so dangerous they were hidden for 2,000 years, and who else has been watching Ethan dig? It was never meant to be found. A sealed door beneath an abbey in southern Italy, covered in centuries of dust and silence. But Ethan found it. A monk had whispered of it. A room no one entered, guarded not by locks but by oaths. And inside, parchments, scrolls, charcoal-stained fragments, a forgotten archive older than the Vatican itself. The air was damp, the scent like old earth and ink. Ethan moved slowly, reverently. This wasn't a library. It was a tomb of knowledge. One scroll caught his eye, symbols traced in red ochre, Aramaic, and something older. He unrolled it gently. The text was prophetic, rhythmic, like the Psalms, but darker. It spoke of watchers who fell, of sons born from shadows, of a curse that passed through wombs, and then a passage. Ethan translated word by word. And in the generation of iron the sons of wrath shall awaken. They shall be born not in wilderness, but in palaces, and the earth shall tremble beneath their command. Generation of iron. Ethan paused. Could it mean now? The age of machines, of networks, of unseen control. He read further. But the scroll of heaven shall be unrolled, and the one who sees shall speak, and many shall mock, and few shall hear. But the time shall come when truth burns brighter than silence. The one who sees. Was that him? Ethan's hands trembled, because in the margin scribbled in Latin were 4 chilling words. Beware the 10th seed. His mind raced. The Book of Jubilees, only 1/10 of the spirits remained. What if this was their legacy? The 10th seed, not just a spirit, a bloodline, a person, someone who would awaken it all. But who and how soon? Ethan photographed everything, hid the scroll again. And as he left the chamber, the monk who had guided him was gone, vanished. Only a whisper remained. You're not the first to find it, but you may be the last. Have you ever discovered a truth so old it felt like it remembered you? That night, Ethan dreamed. He was walking through a city made of glass and smoke. Statues of angels toured above, but their wings were broken. Children played below, unaware of the shadows growing behind them. He followed a whisper. It led him into a great hall, empty but echoing. And there, on a throne of twisted metal, sat a child, eyes like obsidian, silent, watching. Ethan awoke in sweat. Was it just a dream or a vision? He began decoding the prophecy further. The 10th seed wasn't just metaphor. It pointed to an actual birth, a recent one. In his notes, he cross-referenced migration patterns, ancient surnames, birth registries tied to elite bloodlines. And he found a convergence. A child born in Rome, male, unlisted paternity, quietly adopted by a private foundation. No digital trail, but whispers in Vatican correspondence. The name appeared once Dominicus, and the year of birth matched an eclipse. Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't ready. He traced the foundation. It owned a school, hidden in the hills of Croatia. There were no public records, but one photograph had leaked. A boy no older than 12, taller than his classmates, eyes that seemed old. And in the image's corner, etched faintly on the wall, a sigil, the same symbol Ethan had found in the scroll. He had to go, to see him, to know. But as he packed, a message arrived. A voicemail, no caller ID. A man's voice. If you go to the boy, you'll not return the same. Some doors once opened don't close. Choose carefully. Ethan stared at the wall. He whispered to himself, maybe that's the point. Maybe they were never meant to. If the 10th seed walks among us, what would he awaken in you? Ethan's search moved beyond texts, into blood, into names, into shadows cast by ancestry. He began tracing genealogies that documented the disputed and the forbidden. And what he found was a line, a thread that ran from Ham to Canaan to Enoch to Goliath, and then across centuries of diaspora and intermarriage into the folds of modern families. Some names were lost, others hidden, but the thread never snapped. Ethan was no conspiracy theorist. He used DNA studies, Y chromosome markers, genealogical texts. And while much of it was speculative, one thing became disturbingly clear. The bloodline of the giants may have continued through silence, through privilege, through power, because history has a pattern and blood remembers. He found links to ancient Philistines in regions of southern Europe, names with Semitic origins embedded in aristocratic lineages. Even patterns of gigantism, literal and symbolic, traced through rulers known for empire conquest and unexplainable cruelty. But then Ethan found something personal. A DNA fragment from a Middle Eastern dig site, an ancient femur believed to belong to a Philistine warrior. It contained an anomaly, a genetic marker never before catalogued. And when compared to global databases, it matched. A living person, not distant royalty. A politician, anonymous in the research, public on the screen. Ethan stared at the result and wept, because the fight was no longer about past theories. It was now about present influence. What if Nephilim traits were never meant to manifest as size alone, but as spiritual distortion? Ruthless ambition, inhuman detachment. What if the giant in our generation doesn't carry a sword, but a platform, a microphone, a policy? Ethan's research was no longer safe. And that's when the warnings began. What secrets could be so dangerous they were hidden for 2,000 years? And who else has been watching Ethan dig? It was never meant to be found. A sealed door beneath an abbey in southern Italy, covered in centuries of dust and silence. But Ethan found it. A monk had whispered of it. A room no one entered, guarded not by locks but by oaths. And inside, parchments, scrolls, charcoal-stained fragments, a forgotten archive older than the Vatican itself. The air was damp, the scent like old earth and ink. Ethan moved slowly, reverently. This wasn't a library. It was a tomb of knowledge. One scroll caught his eye, symbols traced in red ochre, Aramaic, and something older. He unrolled it gently. The text was prophetic, rhythmic, like the Psalms, but darker. It spoke of watchers who fell, of sons born from shadows, of a curse that passed through wombs. And then, a passage. Ethan translated word by word. And in the generation of iron the sons of wrath shall awaken. They shall be born, not in wilderness, but in palaces, and the earth shall tremble beneath their command. Generation of iron. Ethan paused. Could it mean now? The age of machines, of networks, of unseen control. He read further. But the scroll of heaven shall be unrolled, and the one who sees shall speak, and many shall mock, and few shall hear. But the time shall come when truth burns brighter than silence. The one who sees, was that him? Ethan's hands trembled. Because in the margin scribbled in Latin were 4 chilling words. Beware the 10th seed. His mind raced. The Book of Jubilees, only 1/10 of the spirits remained. What if this was their legacy? The 10th seed, not just a spirit, a bloodline, a person, someone who would awaken it all. But who and how soon? Ethan photographed everything, hid the scroll again, and as he left the chamber, the monk who had guided him was gone, vanished. Only a whisper remained. You're not the first to find it, but you may be the last. Have you ever discovered a truth so old it felt like it remembered you? That night, Ethan dreamed. He was walking through a city made of glass and smoke. Statues of angels towered above, but their wings were broken. Children played below, unaware of the shadows growing behind them. He followed a whisper. It led him into a great hall, empty but echoing. And there, on a throne of twisted metal, sat a child, eyes like obsidian, silent, watching. Ethan awoke in sweat. Was it just a dream or a vision? He began decoding the prophecy further. The 10th seed wasn't just metaphor. It pointed to an actual birth, a recent one. In his notes, he cross-referenced migration patterns, ancient surnames, birth registries tied to elite bloodlines. And he found a convergence. A child born in Rome, male, unlisted paternity, quietly adopted by a private foundation, no digital trail. But whispers in Vatican correspondence. The name appeared once Dominicus, and the year of birth matched an eclipse. Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't ready. He traced the foundation. It owned a school, hidden in the hills of Croatia. There were no public records, but one photograph had leaked. A boy no older than 12, taller than his classmates, eyes that seemed old. And in the image's corner, etched faintly on the wall, a sigil, the same symbol Ethan had found in the scroll. He had to go, to see him, to know. But as he packed, a message arrived, a voicemail, no caller ID. A man's voice. If you go to the boy, you'll not return the same. Some doors once opened don't close. Choose carefully. Ethan stared at the wall. He whispered to himself, maybe that's the point. Maybe they were never meant to. If the 10th seed walks among us, what would he awaken in you? Ethan's plane descended into the mists of Croatia. The air was thick with silence, the hills cloaked in pine and fog. He wasn't here as a tourist. He came to stand face to face with a prophecy. The school looked ordinary, gray stone iron gates, neatly pruned hedges. But Ethan saw through it, felt it, the stillness, the watching. He met with no headmaster, no staff, just a file delivered to his room that night. Inside, student names, birth records, class scores, and photos. One page was marked with red ink. A boy, Dominicus. Not much detail. But on the back, a phrase, "Do not engage alone." Ethan's hands trembled. It was no longer academic. This was a warning, or a dare. He explored the school by day. Empty halls, echoes of children behind walls he couldn't open. And every corridor led somewhere, except to Dominicus. Until one night, the boy found him. Ethan awoke with a start. He wasn't alone. In the corner of the room stood a silhouette, small, still, eyes like black mirrors. "You found me," the boy said. Not a question, a statement, heavy with awareness. Ethan sat up. "I came for answers." "I am not one. I am many," the boy replied. Then he smiled, and Ethan felt something ancient stare through him. The lights flickered. The walls shook not from sound, but pressure. Like the room itself recoiled from what stood inside. "What are you?" Ethan whispered. The boy took a step forward. "The echo of what your kind buried. The inheritance of rebellion. The last breath of a forgotten war." Then, in a voice not his own, "You opened the scroll. You called the name. Now we remember." And with that, the boy vanished. No door opened. No shadow fled. He was simply gone. Ethan collapsed, weeping, because he knew he had not been speaking to a child. He had spoken with the seed, the one that waited. And it was no longer waiting. If the battle is unseen, how will you know which side you're standing on? Ethan didn't sleep. He wandered the Croatian hills until dawn, the boy's voice still echoing inside him. We remember. But who was we? And what would they do now that they remembered? Back at the inn, Ethan decrypted the last portion of the scroll's image he had taken in Italy. A single Hebrew word repeated across the parchment, Zaka. It meant to remember, but not passively. Biblically, Zaka implied action-consequence reckoning. This remembering wasn't nostalgic. It was resurrection, a return. He searched again through the book of Enoch, chapter 69. These are the names of the chiefs of the Watchers, who showed the children of men all the secrets. There were 10 named, 10 rebels, 10 seeds, but only one still echoed. And then it hit him. Dominicus wasn't a new creation. He was a culmination. Not a single child, but a host, a convergence. Each of the 10 spirits had left residue across history. Traits, voices, blood. And now, through trauma, ritual, or fate, they had awakened again, in one. The 10th wasn't a child born. He was a child, assembled. Ethan cross-referenced a hidden Enochic calendar encoded in the margins of an apocryphal Ethiopian manuscript. It matched this year, a convergence unseen in 7,000 years. And the final line of the scroll, he who names the 10th shall not silence it. For what is awakened cannot be unborn. Ethan stared out the window. He whispered the boy's name once more, Dominicus. And for the first time in his life, he felt the world tilt, a sound like thunder. But there were no clouds. A flock of birds rose from the trees in a panic. And beneath the stone of the ancient school, something stirred. The ground did not shake. It exhaled. If remembering is resurrection, what ancient thing have you unknowingly brought back to life? Ethan flew home. But nothing felt like home. The world looked the same: traffic lights, coffee shops, news reports. But something had shifted. He had seen too much. And something had seen him back. Back in his study, he dove into surveillance records, dark web rumors, untraceable forums. People were whispering. Not about Dominicus, no one dared name him, but about someone. A figure rising. Not in politics, not in war, but in spirit. A leader without a title. A voice behind other voices. Ethan tracked the signals and found strange patterns, unexplainable coordination among influencers that mirrored ancient apocryphal texts, ads, and visions shared across cultures. They were all dreaming of him, the child of silence, the seed of wrath, Dominicus. But in these dreams, he had grown, no longer a boy. Now, a preacher, an orator, a prophet. And his message, there is no sin, only evolution. It was subtle, wrapped in peace, progress, unity. But Ethan knew. The voice behind it wasn't human. It was ancient. Scripture warned of this. Revelation 13. The false prophet who performs signs, who makes the world worship the beast. But the world wasn't worshiping out of fear. It was hungry for him. He offered release from guilt, from history, from identity. And people desperate for meaning gave him everything. Their minds, their children, their faith. Ethan wept. Not because people were deceived, but because they were willing. Would you recognize the false prophet? If his words comforted you more than the truth, Ethan wasn't alone anymore. Across the world, whispers had turned into echoes. Symbols once buried in scrolls now glowed on billboards etched into murals, even projected on the sides of skyscrapers. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Then he noticed the pattern. The same sigil from the scroll in Italy, 3 interwoven circles around a single inverted flame, was appearing across continents. Subtly, almost artistically, but always there. And those who noticed, they called it the shift. A spiritual rebranding, not a religion, not a cult. Something more dangerous. A consciousness. No scripture. No dogma. Just presence. Ritual. Unity. And at the center of it all, a voice. It came in many forms, through dream, through soundbite, through augmented filters that overlaid his face on public art. Always calm, always mesmerizing. The old gods demanded sacrifice. I demand awakening. The world listened. They didn't call him Dominicus. They didn't need to. He was known in every language, in every subconscious. Ethan hacked into private Vatican communications and found encrypted references to a gathering. A convergence. Not public, not televised, but monumental. Global leaders were invited, spiritual icons, tech moguls, scientists, even pop stars. Not to a temple, not to a palace, but to a crater, an ancient impact site in Turkey, where myth said the Watchers first fell. Ethan's heart pounded. This was more than prophecy. It was summoning. He booked a flight under a false name, hacked satellite networks, disguised himself with thermal dampeners. He had to see it, even if it meant being seen. Because if Dominicus revealed himself there before those with power to shape nations, this wasn't about ancient bloodlines anymore. It was about now. If a global faith rises without scripture or structure, just desire, would you even know you've joined it? The crater was silent. Not from emptiness, but anticipation. Ethan crouched behind a ridge of blackened stone, the wind cutting like whispers around him. Below, in the heart of the ancient basin, stood a ring of structures, half metallic, half organic. They pulsed faintly with a rhythm not unlike breath. There were no signs, no banners, but cars and aircraft from every continent lined the hills. Private security patrolled perimeters with strange badges, 3 rings, inverted flame. The sigil again, and then they came. Not in robes, in suits, in silks, in lab coats. Heads of state, tech giants, influencers, even spiritual gurus with millions of followers. They sat in silence. A perfect circle. At the center, a pedestal. Nothing on it. Until the sky dimmed. It wasn't nightfall. It was something pulling at light itself. A shimmer like heat wave rose from the pedestal. Shapes formed, pixelated, then refined into a face. Not quite human, not quite other. Eyes that held galaxies, skin like shifting light. And then the voice. You have heard the call. You have come. Now awaken the name hidden in your blood. No one spoke. Some wept. Others stared with awe, unmoving. One man screamed and collapsed. Ethan filmed through thermal lens, but the image distorted, glitched. Whatever this projection was, it wasn't using human tech. It was something else. The figure continued. The Watchers fell, but the seed remained. You are the fruit, chosen not by belief, but by inheritance. A chant began, low at first, then louder. People standing, arms lifted. Ethan's chest tightened, not from fear, from pressure. He tried to breathe. The air tasted metallic, and then vision. He wasn't in the crater anymore. He stood at the base of a volcano, fire pouring from its crown. Thousands walked toward it, silent, eyes pale. Children among them. And at the top, a figure waited. Dominicus. No, something older. Ethan blinked, and the vision vanished. But the chant continued. 10 shall awaken, 1 shall speak, and the world shall remember what it tried to forget. His camera failed. Memory card fried. He turned to leave, but stumbled. And for a moment, every head turned. Toward him, eyes glowing faintly. If truth can summon loyalty deeper than love, what happens when it's used for something ancient? Ethan didn't remember running. Only the burning in his lungs, the cuts on his palms, the silence in his ears after the chant. He made it out of the crater, but something had followed. Not a person. A frequency. At his safe house, he sat hunched over the only salvageable equipment, a lavalier mic clipped to his collar during the summit. The footage was gone, but the audio survived. Barely. He ran it through filters, noise reduction, frequency isolation, reverse harmonics. And there, beneath the main voice, Dominicus, smooth and mesmeric, was another. Faint, unnatural. Ethan looped it, slowed it, spectrogram on full. There were patterns, spikes where no human lungs should breathe. Tones below and above human hearing. It wasn't a second speaker. It was a rider, a hidden signal inside the signal. And when reversed, pitch shifted and layered, it spoke. Words in broken Aramaic, but not merely ancient, original. The veil thins, flesh awakens, covenant shatters. Ethan sat motionless. What was this? He compared it to phonetic structures in old Hebrew Akkadian, even pre-Sumerian fragments. No match, except one. The book of Enoch, chapter 16. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations. A voice like that could not be of the bound. Not still. Unless one had escaped. Unless one had never been bound. Ethan gave it a name. The flame beneath. Not fire of light, but of hunger. Dominicus was not the voice. He was the mouthpiece. The real speaker had never been seen, only felt, like pressure beneath the earth. And if the signal was now riding broadcasts, live streams, rituals, frequencies of devotion, then the whole world was a pulpit. And the flame had begun to preach. Ethan staggered back from the screen. Every hair on his arm stood up. If a watcher survived, if one remained free while the others were cast into darkness, what bargain was made? And why now? He checked the audio logs again. Every 77 seconds, the signal pulsed. Like a heartbeat. A countdown. He looked out his window, and the city lights flickered. What if the voice behind the prophet was never meant to be heard because it was never meant to be awake? There was only one person Ethan could call. Not a scientist, not a theologian, but a monk. Levi, once a crypt analyst for a European intelligence agency. Now cloistered in the shadow of the Alps in a Benedictine monastery older than memory itself. Ethan arrived just before dawn. The chapel bells had not rung, but Levi was already waiting. "You heard it too," Ethan said. Levi nodded. They descended into the scriptorium, a stone archive below the earth, lit only by oil lamps and reverence. Ethan played the signal. Not the voice, the deeper layer. The flame beneath. Levi listened with eyes closed, lips moving silently. Then he opened an ancient codex. "This isn't a voice," he said. "It's a cipher. A code. Not random. Not divine. Designed." The signal, when mapped by frequency spikes, revealed a structure. Not musical. Not mathematical. Linguistic. A language older than Sumer. One Levi had studied only in fragments. "The tongue of watchers," he whispered. They ran pattern extraction, isolated the pulse sequence, overlaid the harmonics. And there, a phrase. "Dominus nascitur in tenebris." Levi translated. "The Lord shall be born in darkness." Ethan felt his pulse drop. Dominicus. Born of whom? Or what? Levi turned the page. An obscure legend from the Dead Sea Scrolls. About a vessel prepared for a disembodied will. About a line of blood that would crack the veil when aligned with the 10th echo. Ethan shook. The DNA fragment. The Philistine femur. It had matched a living person. Not Dominicus. Someone else. A carrier. A gate, Levi whispered. They need both. The voice and the key. Suddenly, Ethan remembered in the scroll beneath the monastery in Italy, the margin note. Beware the 10th seed. Not because he was the flame, but because he would open it. Ethan looked at Levi. What happens if they unite? Levi closed the codex slowly. Then flesh becomes throne. What if prophecy isn't about foretelling events, but warning of convergences. The flight from Zurich to Tel Aviv was uneventful on the surface. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling. He was being watched. Not overtly. Not even suspiciously. Just observed. The aisle seat beside him was empty until halfway through boarding. Then came a man. Elderly, neatly dressed eyes too sharp for his years. He smiled, nodded, said nothing. Ethan tried to focus on his notes. The cipher, the scrolls, the anomaly. But the man beside him opened a leather-bound book. Not a Bible, not a novel, but something older, in Latin. The pages looked handwritten. Ethan couldn't help but glance. The title etched in ink, Chronicon Bellorum Occultorum, the Chronicle of Hidden Wars. The man finally spoke, voice low. "You've seen the signs, haven't you?" Ethan turned, startled. "Excuse me, you're chasing echoes." But they are not echoes, they are signals. War cries. Ethan blinked. "Do I know you?" "No," the man said. "But I know what you're trying to find." He slid the book toward Ethan. Page 74. Ethan opened it. A drawing, crude symbolic, showing a tree with two roots. One marked Berith, the other Zerah. Covenant, contamination. The man continued, "There have always been two bloodlines, one made to carry promise, one made to carry rebellion." Ethan's breath slowed. Cain and Abel. Further back, the man whispered. Before even Eden. Before bodies. When the Watchers chose rebellion, they did not just fall, they seeded opposition. Ethan leaned closer. "This book, where did you get it?" The man smiled. "From those who remember." He looked out the window. "There are wars that never made it into history. Not because they were small, but because they were never meant to be known. Fought in corridors of power, in the shadows of governments, in the boardrooms of institutions." Ethan shook his head. "Are you saying this is still happening?" The man didn't answer, just said, "There are gatekeepers, people tasked with holding the line, not soldiers, not prophets, just watchers. And what happens if one of them turns?" The man closed the book. "Then the enemy doesn't need to break in. He'll be let in as a guest." "What would you do if you found out the gate was already open?" The airport in Tel Aviv was hot, crowded, indifferent. Ethan moved fast, heart still echoing the flight's final words. "The enemy won't need to break in. He'll be let in." At baggage claim, a man watched him, discreet, but not invisible. Slick suit, too polished. When Ethan turned, the man adjusted his tie and vanished into a corridor. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern. Ethan left through the side exit, took a taxi under a false name. His destination, a safe house run by a small messianic fellowship, a place off every map but still anchored in prayer. Behind locked doors, he exhaled. Then he opened the book. Chronicon Bellorum Occultorum, page 119. The section marked the 7 gates. It wasn't just symbolic. These weren't metaphors. They were locations. Gates where the spiritual realm breached the natural world, where the Watchers fell, where the giants rose. The text named 7 ancient points: Mount Sinai, Tower of Babel, Valley of Megiddo, Rome, Oracle of Delphi, the Giza Plateau, and then an empty line, just a mark. No name, a sealed entry, Porta Octava, the 8th gate. Ethan stared. The text called it the gate that was never meant to open, or the one that never truly closed. He flipped to the marginalia notes written by previous owners. One passage in Greek said, "The 8th is hidden by silence, because its opening was not an act, but a forgetting." Forgetting. Ethan's mind reeled. What if this gate wasn't destroyed, but erased? A breach so devastating, so irreversible that those who knew chose amnesia over memory. He opened his laptop, cross-referenced coordinates, dates, seismic shifts, ancient cult activity, and found something, a pattern of missing archives from 1947. a monastery in Bosnia destroyed in a fire, but Vatican files listed it as defunct centuries earlier. The terrain, mountainous, remote, too far for tourism, too forgotten for war. But why there? What happened? He zoomed in on the only surviving image of the monastery ruins. Faded stone, and in the rubble a mosaic. Barely visible, but it was there. The same sigil from the scroll, the same mark found on the boy's wall, the same seal from the book. Ethan's breath caught. The eighth gate wasn't just a metaphor. It was real, and it had already opened. What would you do if the most dangerous truth wasn't hidden from you, but waiting for you to remember it? Like this story stirred something ancient in you. Leave a 7-7 in the comments to say I see it now. And I won't unsee it. The journey isn't over. It's only narrowing. Because in the next breath, Ethan decides he's going in. The road to the monastery was gone, wiped from maps, swallowed by vines. Only fragments of stone guided Ethan's ascent through the Bosnian hills. He walked in silence. Each step stirred dust that hadn't moved in decades. The air grew colder. His GPS flickered, then died. The compass spun. Something didn't want to be found. After 4 hours, Ethan reached it. Not a monastery, a ruin. What once stood proud was now broken bones, columns, toppled murals, faded stones, blackened by old fire. But one thing remained intact. A door, half buried under earth and ivy, ringed by ancient symbols. And on its archway 4 words chiseled in a language older than Hebrew. Enochian. Ethan photographed it, sent it to his contacts. While waiting, he brushed off the moss, revealing the full inscription. Here lies what heaven bound and earth forgot. The translation came minutes later. A linguist replied, "It's not just a warning. It's a tether. Something beneath is restrained not by stone, but by witness. If no one remembers, the seal weakens." Ethan's hand trembled. He pressed his palm against the door. It was warm. Not stone cold, but pulsing, like breath, like waiting. Then, a tremor, subtle, silent but real. And in that instant, Ethan saw, not with eyes, with memory. Cities burning, skies torn, towers falling, children weeping, and at the center, a figure, cloaked, silent, watching. The boy, the same eyes from the photograph, but older now, taller, standing in Times Square, then in the desert, then by the Western Wall, each place crumbling as he passed. Then Ethan saw himself, watching, powerless. The vision ended. He fell backward, gasping. The door had not opened, but it had noticed him, and something stirred. Beneath the ruins, deep under stone and silence, a heartbeat returned. Slow, steady, patient. Ethan whispered, "What have I touched?" No voice replied, but in the wind, a word echoed through the broken pillars. Soon, Ethan sat motionless outside the ruin. The fire in his lantern had died. Only the stars bore witness now. He opened his journal, not to write, but to remember. Pages filled with drawings, the sigils, the scrolls, the boy. Each one stared back at him like a mirror of doubt. He turned to the last page. Blank. Yet under moonlight, faint lines began to emerge. Not ink, not charcoal, but ash. A handprint, his own, now darkened the page, as if something had written through him. He tried to wipe it away, but the shape remained etched into the fibers. Not a mark, a seal. Somewhere deep in the night, a howl rose. Not animal, not human. A groan of memory of Earth remembering what it once buried. Ethan lifted his eyes. The ruins loomed still and watchful. The Enochian words carved above the doorway now glowed faintly. Here lies what heaven bound and earth forgot. It wasn't a warning. It was a lament. Not of what was hidden, but of who would one day open it. He looked at his hands. still trembling, not from fear but from knowledge. Because the boy had spoken, because the seal had stirred, because silence no longer meant safety. In the stillness, a thought returned, soft, persistent, like a breath behind the veil. Truth does not sleep. It waits in blood. And now it waited in him. If what the scrolls said was true, then memory had found a vessel, a witness. Not a warrior, not a prophet, a man who chose to listen. He rose slowly, packed his tools, folded his journal, doused the cold ash with prayer. As he stepped away, a single leaf fell from the ruins above, silent, weightless, and landed on the door. It curled, burned at the edges, and vanished into smoke. Ethan did not turn back. But before the trees swallowed him, he spoke not in defiance, but in reverence. "I saw you." Then he was gone. The night deepened, the stars shifted, and beneath the earth a silence took root, no longer dormant, but watching. Sometimes the loudest battles begin with a whisper no one hears. If this journey stirred something in you, leave a trace, a single word, a number, a memory. Let the watchers know someone still remembers. Until then, walk softly.